The global conflict had sputtered out, yet for Japanese civilians stranded across the Pacific's islands, the word end was a cruel, hollow echo. Bombers and shells had ceased, but the silence was heavy, pregnant with absolute dread. For the women sequestered in a crumbling Saipan village, the idea of surrender was not relief. It was a surrender to their deepest terrors. For months, the fear had been a tangible thing, breathed in with the jungle air. Retreated soldiers had spewed the warnings like poison. The Americans show no mercy. They will take everything. Death is the only honorable path. Propaganda posters screamed the same message, painting the enemy as brutal, bestial, and devoid of honor. Mothers ensured their daughters concealed knives. Grandmothers murmured that only self-destruction could save their souls. Thus, when American patrols at last crunched into the village square, the women were huddled, trembling, inside a collapsed storehouse. They were wives of farmers, young daughters, and widows of defeated men, clutching children to their breasts. They froze as heavy boots sounded outside, followed by voices barking commands in an alien guttural tongue. The door groaned open, bathing the dim interior in blinding tropical sunlight. A tall Marine stood silhouetted in the frame, helmet low, rifle slung with unnerving nonchalance. Behind him, more soldiers fanned out. The women, pressed rigid against the rear wall, stared with the blank eyes of hunted animals. The Marine spoke, then shouted, but no one moved. Finally, an interpreter rendered the terrifying words into their language. "You are prisoners now. You will not be harmed. Stay together. Food will be given." They did not believe him. They stumbled into the harsh sun, blinking, their kimonos tattered, their hair matted from weeks in the shadows. They carried infants and guided toddlers, every nerve screaming that this was the instant of degradation they had been promised. But the moment did not arrive. The soldiers formed a loose perimeter, their rifles lowered, yet they did not approach. They did not touch. Instead, one soldier walked forward, placing a bucket of water on the ground, then immediately retreated. Another set down a wooden crate of canned food, expertly pried open with a bayonet. The interpreter gestured simply, "Eat, for you." The women stared, convinced it was a trap. One brave, desperate mother knelt, cupped water, and drank. The soldiers were motionless. Another reached for the food. Still, only silence and distance. Slowly, tentatively, the impossible began. Broth touched their lips for the first time in weeks. Soft bread crumbled in their starved mouths. Mothers wept, their tears blending with the taste of the unfamiliar rations. Yet the Americans maintained their respectful distance. As darkness fell, the women were guided to a makeshift enclosure. Blankets, clean, new blankets, were handed out in neat stacks. One by one, they accepted them, waiting for the exchange, the moment when the soldiers would demand the price. But no demand came. The men stood guard at the perimeter, often with their backs half-turned, acting as protection rather than predators. Whispers rippled through the enclosure. A young girl, barely 18, hissed, "Why do they not take us? Did they not come for that?" Her mother hushed her, but the burning question was shared by all. Relief wrestled violently with deep-seated guilt. Their culture had promised violation and death. Yet here they were, under a foreign sky, being treated with a detached, inexplicable courtesy. Sachiko, an elder clutching a hidden rosary, murmured, "Perhaps their God is watching." But hours bled into days, and the strange pattern held. Fresh food, clean water, blankets returned washed, and never once did a soldier breach the invisible boundary that separated them. One evening, a Marine approached their fire, carrying a burlap sack. He paused a careful distance away, set it down, and immediately stepped back. Inside were brushes, small cloths, and bars of soap. "For washing," The interpreter explained haltingly. For you. The women gasped. Some were too consumed by shame and distrust to reach for the gifts. But one woman, trembling, reached out and took a brush. She dipped it in the water and scrubbed her young son's face until the grime gave way to pink, healthy skin. The boy giggled, the first sound of genuine joy the village had heard in an eternity. The soldiers deliberately averted their eyes, granting them privacy. That night, Sachiko found a scrap of cloth and a piece of charcoal. She wrote, "We prepared ourselves for death and dishonor. We thought they would strip us of everything. Instead, they gave us blankets, food, and they did not even touch us. I do not understand." The true shock was not the expected cruelty, but the absence of it. In a world defined by violence, mercy was the most disorienting weapon. It forced them to question every belief they held about war and survival. Before we continue, please take a moment to hit the like button below. Your support helps this story reach others. And if you're finding this rewrite compelling, please subscribe and leave a comment telling me which part of the story moved you most. The next leg of their journey began at dawn, a march to a larger compound. The women formed a nervous line, children clinging to their sides. Guards walked ahead and behind, their rifles easy, not aimed. Every footfall felt like walking toward the end of their reprieve. There, the officers will exact their price. But the camp was not a dungeon. It was a collection of barracks, tents, and a distinct Red Cross station. Prisoners were sorted, men one way, women and children another. More supplies were distributed, rice, tinned milk, even fresh fruit. Still, the women hesitated, convinced every kindness was a hook. Yet the pattern held. The Americans offered the food, then stepped back. They gave out the soap, then turned their backs. They maintained that crucial unspoken distance. Days stretched into weeks, and the hands they dreaded never reached for them. The shock of this absence became its own unbearable weight. One afternoon, a medical officer and 2 nurses arrived. "We will check the children and mothers," the officer announced through the translator. "Anyone sick will receive medicine." Medical care from the enemy? When the officer knelt to examine a coughing child, his touch was genuinely gentle. He handed the mother a small vial of syrup. The mother dissolved in silent bows, unable to reconcile this care with the monster she had been taught to fear. "Our own soldiers told us to die before capture," Sachiko whispered. "Yet here, the enemy tells us to live." The next shock came at dusk. A soldier approached with paper and pencils. The interpreter announced, "You may write letters to your families. The Red Cross will send them." Letters? The idea of reconnecting with the world they thought had abandoned them was incomprehensible. Slowly, their hands trembling, they reached for the paper. "I am alive. Do not despair." A young woman named Ko wept, her tears blurring the ink as she wrote to her mother in Nagasaki. "I thought I would die in shame, but they have not touched me. They feed us." The letters were collected, folded, and carried away. The mere act of writing, the act of reclaiming their voices, lifted an immense, agonizing weight from their chests. The Americans maintained their bewildering restraint. Guards patrolled but did not intrude. When blankets grew worn, they brought new ones. Medicine appeared for feverish children. Always, the same distance, the same respect. This absence gnawed at their core beliefs. The enemy, described as barbaric and lustful, had preserved their dignity and fed their children. "The greatest shock is not cruelty," Sachiko wrote later. "It is respect. We thought they would strip us of honor. Instead, they gave us back our voices." The question was no longer when the abuse would come, but why it had not. In that unbroken silence, the women began to see their captors not as monsters, but as men. Exhausted, weary, human. By late summer 1945, Japan's surrender was confirmed. The women felt deep uncertainty. Their captivity had marked them, not with bruises, but with a profound confusion. They admitted what they hadn't dared voice. They had not been touched. Not once. Ko received a reply through the Red Cross. Her mother's words were shaking. "I thought you dead. I know you live. God has answered prayers." Ko clutched the paper, sobbing. Sachiko gathered the younger women and spoke with the authority of a lifetime of fear being dissolved by astonishment. "We were told these men would shame us. But I tell you this, they did not even touch us. They fed us. They guarded us. They gave us back our voices." In September, the release orders arrived. The women were escorted to boats for the journey home. They carried only small bundles, clutching keepsakes, a bar of soap, a new blanket, a folded letter. Ko whispered to her sister, "I am more afraid to go home than I was to be captured." They returned to a nation in ruins, but they carried an untold story, a truth about an enemy that had chosen dignity over violation. In her diary, Ko wrote, "The Americans did not touch us. That was the greatest shock. I found men tired of war, men who chose not to cross the line. That is what I will carry until I die." For these women, history was measured in silence, the silence of hands that never reached, of a boundary that was never crossed, of their dignity unexpectedly preserved. The most astonishing legacy of the war for them was not the violence they remembered, but the absence of it. Thank you for reading this deeply moving story of restraint and unexpected mercy in the face of fear. If you found the message powerful, please consider supporting the channel by hitting the like button, subscribing for more historical deep dives, and leaving a comment below to share your thoughts on the women's shocking discovery.